St. Vincent de Paul is doing great work in our community, and it's because so many people are giving of their time, their talent, and their treasure. Joining me is Sister Joan Laplace. How are you today, Sister Joan?
I'm fine, Michael. I'm glad to be here, honored to be here.
You've been involved with St. Vincent de Paul for many years, and you've got a wonderful commitment to serving the poor. But let's talk about where you are in your spiritual journey and where it all started.
I guess it starts with my parents and with the sisters, because I went to school from primer on with the Sisters of St. Joseph. My parents, my mother was Episcopalian, my father was Catholic. He was non-practicing. She was the one who made sure that we went to school at a Catholic school. He was willing to pay for it, but I don't know how much more he was going to do than that. So they married when, because of the difference in religion, they married in the rectory at Holy Rosary in New Orleans. She signed the papers, he signed the papers. We were raised, the four children were eventually raised in Catholic schools, and we lived on the same block as Holy Rosary, so the school and the sisters were very much a part of my life. I can never remember not kind of just running over there and helping out or playing ball or just going to novena or whatever was going on, being in the CYO when I got into high school. So it was really, I grew up in my house, but I grew up on the block, literally, of Holy Rosary, and we just were very close to everybody and everything in our neighborhood, whether it was the grocery or the school or the church or our neighbors. So I really think that my vocation was rooted in that neighborhood feeling, for which I am totally grateful. I didn't really think about being a religious until I got into high school, and I was at St. Joseph Academy in a school with the Sisters still of St. Joseph. And at that point, I wasn't, maybe I didn't want to be a sister. Whatever it was, I didn't talk about it. Mm-hmm. My parents didn't talk about it. It wasn't a family where there was a lot of conversation about religious vocation, really. Mm-hmm. They weren't opposed to it. They certainly thought highly of the sisters and the priest, mm-hmm. but it wasn't in some families where you have really a push. There was certainly no push in that direction. So by the time I was a senior, and I just finally, at the end of senior year practically, I went to my mother and said something about, I'm thinking about, I'd like to be a Sister of St. Joseph, and she says, did you talk to your dad? Typical. And I said, no, and I go to him, and he said, well, did you talk to your mother? And I said, no, but she said, talk to you first, so I did. So his response, no big conversation, was, well, would you consider going to Loyola first for a year? And I'm thinking, I wasn't even thinking college. I didn't think we could afford college, period. I probably would have gone to UNO, which I think was opening that year. And so I said, just right off the bat, well, sure, I'll go to Loyola. And I did for a year. And at a year's end, I went back to him and said, did you mean it, and can I go now? And he said, well, a bargain's a bargain. And that's about the extent of my vocation promotion by my parents. They really, they trusted me.
Right.
They certainly always supported me, but it was different from what I hear from many, many people whose lives were very intertwined with family going to Mass, family going to saying the Rosary every night, family and friends that came around often and talked about religion and Catholicism. It wasn't that way. I was just lucky enough to have been able to have grown up with the sisters, because I think that's where more of my education came from. Even though I came from a Catholic family, I just think more came from the sisters than the family. But my family they were just people of integrity, and for that I am totally grateful. So.
Well, the sisters, I mean, and the calling that, because you weren't pushed in that direction, it was something that you felt the Holy Spirit, and you felt it through the sisters.
It had to be within, because it wasn't coming, as you said, from outside.
Right.
I truly believe that I was impressed, as most young kids are, I think, impressed by the people around me that I really liked. And the sisters were the people that had fun with us. I didn't think of them as serious at all. I knew they were good educators in the classroom, but that wasn't impressive, you know, when I'm a kid. I was impressed by the fact that we could go out on the playground and I'll go on a picnic with them or things like that. So I just enjoyed
You were
them as
attracted to the
people.
holiness. I mean,
I knew they were good people. And they got us to do things that were fun, but also helping other people.
Yes.
So that was mine.
And the Sisters of St. Joseph embrace the dear neighbor.
Yes.
And if you think about it, what's wrong with the world is there's just not enough of God's love. I mean, it's all over. God's love's all over, but there are not enough people spreading it. And that's what the Sisters of St. Joseph want to do. They want to spread God's love to our dear neighbors. Talk about that commitment to the neighbor that the sisters have.
I think that in those days, the neighborhood was everything. We didn't go anywhere else, pretty much. So your neighbors meant a great deal to you, and it was assumed that you would take care of one another. Whether you were in the family or whether you were in the school, there was an awful lot of just assuming that we take care of one another, whoever one another is. Whether it's the guy down the street that's playing ball with you and does what he's supposed to do at school, or it's the guy who comes to the grocery store and needs a handout, or comes to the house and needs a handout. You still try to help people wherever they are. I don't remember ever being in a situation where even though segregation was so obviously the case at the time, and I came from a family, I'm sure, that was very segregated, and I had a lot of that in me. At the same time, I never felt like anybody taught me to be anything but respectful to people, whoever they were. And I think that dear neighbor applied to everybody, whatever their age, whatever their color, whatever their economic status. I just can't help but be grateful for that part of my life.
Well, one thing you've shared with me before was, Sister, you originally, early on, showed up to class. Tell us that story, because it's a great story. I mean, about how, and it shows you respect for the sisters at a very early age. Share that story.
This was really early on. I was like 6, okay, and I'm starting school a year later than most people, but anyway, I was starting, the first child in the family. My mother, I think, kept home an extra year. Okay, so I go to school, Holy Rosary. We have a primer class that I'm going to be in, which today would be kindergarten. And I get in the class with Sister Aloysius, who later became Sister Jane Aucoin, but she was, I thought, about 12 feet tall and in the habit, and I sat in the back desk. I don't know whether she put me there or that just happened, but I was in the back. First day they call roll, not my name. I don't say a word, she doesn't say a word. Second day they call roll, not my name. I don't say a word, she doesn't say a word. Third day, call the roll. Somebody comes to the door and says, "Do you have Joan Laplace in this class?" And Jane Aucoin, Sister Aloysius, says, "Well, I don't think so." And with that, I had to admit I was Joan Laplace, so I did. And they took me to the next classroom, which was primer and first grade combined, and I had a new desk in the primer section. And that's how I started school 3 days later than everybody else in my class, because I didn't want to say absent or present.
Yes, indeed. Tremendous respect.
But I just thought those sisters knew what they were doing, and I wasn't going to do a thing that wasn't right.
I would have done the same thing. But you know, that's respect. I mean, doesn't the world need more respect, whether it be something like you just described? It's just, you know, that when we treat people with respect, if they're different from us, if they come from different walks of life, have different faith backgrounds, if we treat everybody with respect,
it just opens so many doors. It really does.
Well, when we come back, we'll talk about opening doors and why it's important that we as a faith community do just that right here in the Baton Rouge Diocese.
My Bicycle Journey, a book that tells a story. It educates, it promotes, and it also provides some leadership. Take the time to purchase this book, and St. Vincent de Paul benefits from all of the proceeds of this book. Please, if you would, give St. Vincent de Paul a call and let me know what you think of my bicycle journey.
At St. Vincent de Paul, we say we have an open door where we can embrace and take care of those who need to feel God's love. And joining me today, Sister Joan Laplace. We talk about opening doors, and I think of the Sisters of St. Joseph. So many women that have committed themselves to sharing themselves and living a religious life. And I think of special people. I think of you, and I know you don't want to talk a lot about yourself, but Sister Carolyn Brady. What a magnificent woman, a woman that gave so many years to the Sisters of St. Joseph. She recently passed, but let's talk a little bit about Sister Carolyn. She made a remarkable difference here locally with the Sisters, but also St. Vincent de Paul. She's in our Hall of Fame, and let's just talk about that beautiful woman.
Sister Carolyn was in Baton Rouge when I was first sent here in 1964-65. She was about 9 years ahead of me, and she was teaching math, I believe, at the time. And so I lived at the house at that time. It was 32 sisters and about 32 children in the children's home. A couple were orphans, most were not. And then the staff for the children's home. So we were 80-something people in the house. And so that was the first year that I lived with sisters in a big house in an apostolate situation. And Sister Carolyn was one of the hardest working sisters in the school. She had all kind of duties besides teaching. She seemed to be able to get it all done, and I always enjoyed helping her with anything. Then she was sent to be principal in New Orleans at Holy Rosary School for about 6 or 7 years. When she came back, I had been made principal, and I was not too sure what I was doing as principal. And I said, you've been a principal before. Of course, it was an elementary school, but anyway, would you mind being my assistant so you can train me? So she said, oh, sure, I'll help in whatever way I can, which is the way we do things. And there were other sisters on the faculty who either had been principals or had been assistants, and I got help from everybody. The one that I got the most amazing help from was Sister Felix, who happened to have been my high school principal 10 years before I was made principal. Because when they said, will you be principal at St. Joseph's in Baton Rouge? Do you have any questions? I said, what did Sister Felix say? And they said, why do you ask? I said, because she was my principal. And I could just imagine her saying something like, well, she's so young or something. And they said, well, we didn't check with Sister Felix. I said, okay. So I started out as principal, trying to learn as quickly as I could. I could not have had a greater supporter than Sister Felix. Never interfered, never criticized, always just, if there was help to be given and she could give it, she gave it. She always made you feel like she respected you totally. And I know she scared people to death as a classroom teacher. Many kids would say, whoo, she was tough. But she was the one that later they would say, she was wonderful. I really learned so much from her.
Yeah, it goes back to what we said in the first segment about respect. You know, I didn't have the wonderful opportunity to know Sister Felix, but I did know Sister Carolyn. And Sister Carolyn had that same air of respect and seriousness, but she was just so wonderful and just a person that was giving of their heart and soul in everything they did. And you're right, hard worker and there to serve.
Right. And I think her interest in St. Vincent de Paul came partly, I don't think she even realized it, but she would say some things about her father, who was much older when she was born. Her parents were almost 40, I think. So her dad had been from Paulina, Louisiana, and he was big in St. Vincent de Paul. And I think that rubbed off on her in a certain way. And so when she had the opportunity, she really did commit herself to St. Vincent de Paul as a way of serving the dear neighbor.
Yeah, and I think her parents had called her a precious heart.
Oh, her dad, that was his favorite expression, and everybody in the community knew it when she entered. I mean, it was just like obvious. Only child, precious heart, she was it.
Yeah. And that's how we should look at every child in the world, as a precious heart. I think that's too what her commitment was to St. Vincent de Paul. I never asked her to do anything that she didn't say, yes, I will do that. She even appeared on Beacons of Light many years ago, because I asked her, but it was like a very short interview, because she
didn't want to do that.
She didn't want to be on television. It was, you know, she was a quiet woman in some respects relative to all the good she did in the world. And
She didn't like the spotlight, but if
didn't.
Michael asked, then she was caught.
Well, she said, yeah, but I said, well, I'm not going to push it. I'm going to get a couple minutes and then let it go. But what a joy. And when you talk about the Sisters of St. Joseph, I think of Sister Joan, too. Now, Sister Joan is going to be 90 years old.
That's right, this month.
Yeah, and she is just a remarkable woman. I'm 52. I probably could stay with her for about 25% of the time. What about you, sister, huh?
I've been on vacation with her where, you know, she wants to get up at 4 in the morning and go walk on the beach and find sand dollars, which I love to do.
Yeah.
But then I don't want to stay up and play cards until midnight.
That's right.
And she could do both.
Yes, she can.
So, you know, I try to keep up with her, but, you know.
And she was a St. Thomas More principal here locally for many years, and so there are a lot of children out there with fond memories of Sister Joan. But the Sisters of St. Joseph, I mean, they make such an impact. Your focus is on, I have 2 daughters that went to school there, and I'm indebted to the sisters for just opening their eyes to the faith. And that's the most important thing that y'all do as a congregation, right?
I think, and it's something that you never really know what you're accomplishing while you're doing it. And then later on, things happen and people make comments, or they write letters, or you hear about something third hand and you realize that little moment 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 60 years ago with a sister made all the difference in this person's life. She's carried it to this day. Right. So it's passing on values is the most important thing anybody can do. At the same time, it's one of the most difficult things to measure when you're doing it. You know, we use all kinds of techniques, and sometimes you think the one that's working is the best, and all of a sudden you realize it's something you didn't even notice actually affected this person's life much more. You showed up at some birthday party that the mother said, if you can stop by, just come do that. And it turned out to be when the grandmother was there, and the grandmother was all impressed, and she's a graduate, and she can't believe that the sisters are still keeping up with people. So I think God has his way of doing it, and we just try to play along and pray along the whole time.
Well, you're evidence of that. You talked about in the first segment how the sisters touched your life, changed your life, and made you who you are today. And you mentioned before we went on camera, we were talking about the great B'nai Israel congregation. St. Vincent de Paul gets so much support from them. They do so much for the community, but they're right there next to St. Joseph. But you mentioned a story about a student that recently did, you know, a very, very kind thing for the synagogue.
One of our students at the time of the mass shootings at the synagogue in Illinois, Ohio, wherever it was, I hate to say there's so many I don't remember, but she on her own just decided that she was going to write a letter to the rabbi who has been to the school for different occasions. We have a good relationship with the synagogue, with the temple, and so she wrote the letter, a beautiful letter. We didn't know anything about it. We, the faculty, we, the administration. And later, he responded and sent us a copy of the letter, and she went over there and presented it to him just on a Friday night, I think, at their service. At the end of the service, she went up to him, just to let him know that we, St. Joseph's Academy, are with you at this time of great sorrow for your community, for the Jewish community, and we're all one, which, you know, is part of our language, but to have a student just on her own do that was very, very moving for all of us to realize that she would do that, and that he was certainly very touched by it also.
Yeah, well, it's touching because, I think that's what our call is, our neighbor. Whether it's a neighbor in need for a material item, clothing, shelter, food, or someone that needs emotional support, like the synagogue did in those very, very troubling times that we find ourselves in. When we come back, St. Vincent de Paul keeps hope alive, and we'll talk with Sister Joan about the importance of keeping hope alive right here in our community. For over 20 years, the St. Vincent de Paul Community Pharmacy has served our area. We provide prescription medicines for those who have nowhere to turn for this most basic healthcare need. Please, if you need your medicine or you know a family member that needs their medicine, contact us. Kay, how can they get in touch?
383-7450.
Give us a call today and spread the word so that we can ensure no one goes without their prescription medication. At St. Vincent de Paul, we keep hope alive, and that's what it's all about. But to keep hope alive, you have to have individuals that commit themselves to spreading God's love, and that's what the Sisters of St. Joseph do so well throughout our community and world. Sister Joan, spreading God's love and being open to change. You became principal of St. Joseph in the 1960s, a time of a lot of change.
A lot, yes. The end of the 60s when I became principal was civil rights, was Vietnam. We were certainly in great difficulty in this country. Kennedy had been killed, and that was still very much hanging over us. And although it was a great turmoil, the school was a sort of a cocoon. There were lots of ways in which we really did not, we, the sisters, we were still not watching the news a lot, I don't think, in those days. We did have some sisters, younger sisters, who were into the Joan Baez songs and all of the kinds of songs that told us what was going on. And so I can remember some parents being very upset because in religion class they were singing that kind of song at prayer services, and where have all the flowers gone and things like that. And eventually it calmed down, but at the beginning that was not something that as parents we got a lot of encouragement for that. The changes in the church were extremely difficult during that time. We had gone from habit to lay clothes. We had gone from our old names to our new names. We had new religion books. We had people saying that, well, you don't really have to go to church on Sunday anymore. And you know, we weren't teaching that, but kids were saying that, and you were hearing it in the general news. So Vatican II was just being interpreted in all kinds of ways by all kinds of people, and the news media would carry it every day. So it was a very tough time, even though we were protected in many ways, and our parents were wonderfully supportive of the school. It was not a time that I would say was as easy as it looked, even to some of us. When I look back on it, I realize there was a lot undergoing change.
Well, God brought you through all that.
Sure did.
One of the things you shared off camera was you were 28 years old when you were asked to become principal. So share with us, who do you call after they ask you to become principal?
Well, first of all, it's good that you would be that young, I guess, because you're so young and so unaware that you say yes to anything, and God has to step in and help you because there's no other way you would survive. I don't know if 28 then is the same as 28 now. I suspect there might be a little bit more maturity by some people, but definitely not at that time. I called my mother and said, Mom, guess what? They just asked me to be principal. Now, she was in New Orleans. I'm in Baton Rouge on the phone. Using the phone was a big deal. She said, they what? And I said, they asked me to be principal. She said, I can't believe it. And I thought to myself, well, that's, I guess, the way Mama wants to see it. She never did say, that's wonderful. She did think it was wonderful, and I knew that. I mean, I wasn't worried about it. I don't know, I wasn't smart enough to be worried, I guess. And she always supported me, and my dad did too. But by that time, he had died, and she was just taking care of the four of us and proud of me. But it wasn't, I guess I was still her little girl. I always was. You always are your mother's child. And so I became principal. I had tons of help, thank God, from sisters, from lay faculty, from parents. We had parents who were educators, who were just wonderful people. Not people who wanted to tell me what to do, because I would have resisted that. I mean, I knew that was in my nature. It's pretty normal that if you get told what to do, you don't want to do it. But there were a lot of smart people who knew how to deal with me, and I think I dealt pretty well with a lot of them, so we got things done.
And
that's the story.
That's a great story. I mean, you know, I think it shows that the Sisters of St. Joseph, when something's right, you follow the Lord. And, you know, 28 years old is young, but you were there from the late 60s to all the way through
the 70s, that's right.
And
you know, you're not doing it alone, even if people think, well, she's the principal, she's in charge. That's true. But it's a team.
Right.
It's a big team. And you have to learn how to work together and know when to say yes and when to say no. And you learn by doing, and you learn by mistakes.
And God is there for you, whether you're making the good
That's right.
decision. I mean, when you make those good decisions, and when you make decisions that maybe you wish you had back, but God's always there to make sure, good times, bad times, whatever.
And somehow, I think as sisters, we've always got this hope that whatever happens, God is going to pull us through this if we do our part. And I think we conveyed that to many students through the years who have had some hard times. Everybody does. But, you know, you have to encourage people to believe in the future and believe in themselves and what God has given them to meet the future. And they do it.
You just have to take those leaps of faith, knowing that God is there to catch us.
Right. He doesn't always catch me when I want him to catch me, but he always catches me.
That's it.
Yeah, when it matters.
And as part of a religious life, what would you say, with just a minute to go, how would you encourage people to grow spiritually, in a few words?
I think in our day and age, it's important to take some time to just be quiet. It's important to take some time to pay attention to people that you might be overlooking, who are living very deep lives. Maybe they're suffering a lot, and maybe that's what's making them deep in their faith. But paying attention to everything around you without always trying to talk your way through everything. Because just be quiet and listen to God is within.
Great advice, and a great way to end our show with me being quiet. We'll see you again next week on Beacons of Light.